Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, Tulsa's source for great gardens, southwoodgardencenter.com. and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing.
Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's program, host Casey Hentges will be planting bare root trees in the orchard. We'll have tips on keeping your trees well watered. Casey looks at a great plant to light up a shady area this time of year, and we plant potatoes in mesh cages for great production and an easy harvest.
When you purchase a tree, typically it's packaged in one of three ways. It may come balled and burlapped, which means that it has been grown out in a field, dug up out of that field, and the root ball has been wrapped in burlap, and then usually it's contained inside of a wire basket, or it might just be wrapped in twine. This is often referred to as B&B also. You might buy a containerized tree, which means the tree has been grown in a container and upsized as it needed to be. Now these containers can be either fabric or plastic, but they contain a whole root system of that tree. You may also buy a bare root tree, and these don't come with any packaging other than some material to keep the moisture around those roots, but it doesn't come with any soil. A lot of times when we buy trees online, especially in late winter, we might get a bare root tree. Today we have a bare root tree, and this is what we're going to look at planting. A lot of times when we talk about bare root trees, we tend to think about fruit trees. Now you can buy fruit trees at most nurseries, and those will probably likely be containerized trees. If you're not finding the correct selection that you're looking for, then you might turn to the internet, and again, it will likely come as a bare root tree. Now there's pros and cons to all of these. Obviously, if you're buying online, you don't want the weight of the soil, so that's one of the nice benefits of bare root trees. We've bought some for our new orchard that we're establishing outside our vegetable garden here. And when you get this package in the mail, you want to make sure you open it right away. You know how you feel after you've been traveling, and that's not in the cargo hold. So we want to inspect these and make sure that they don't have any damage to them. If they do, you obviously want to contact your supplier right away. Now this looks good and everything, and so because they've been out of water for quite a while, we want to make sure to rehydrate them before we plant them. So you'll want to soak those roots for about an hour or two prior to planting. You never want to soak them for more than 24 hours because that can cause some damage to them. Now when we plant, we're simply going to start digging our hole. Like I said, it's a smaller tree, so we don't have to dig quite such a big hole though. Now that we have our tree hole ready for planting, you can see that this is deep enough and it's just as wide. We want to make sure that we try to plant it at the same level that you can see the color change. Now obviously the roots have been wet, but you can see the root flare here and where the stems start right there. So we're going to make sure to get it at that same level. One area that you want to make sure never to bury is this graft union right here. Fruit trees are a lot of times grafted trees, and this particular one that we've purchased here is a Bradley nectarine tree. Bradley is actually a selection that's a cross between an Arkansas peach and an Arkansas nectarine selection. The Bradley nectarine is known for having attractive, firm fruit, and so that's why we like this cultivar. However, a lot of times fruit trees, the rootstock might not be as desirable. In this instance, it is on Lovell rootstock, which is a little bit more cold hardy and also is more tolerant of wet soils, which is ideal for our Oklahoma clay soils. So again, this is where the graft is, and this is the Lovell rootstock, and then above this is the Bradley cultivar, which will give us that nice produce. So we want to make sure not to cover that up ever, and so we will then just backfill this with our native soil that we've already excavated from this hole, and that way the tree goes ahead and gets adjusted to the soil that it will be growing in. If you put good soil in here, then it might be that that root system stays in that good soil and doesn't branch out, whereas we want those roots to really grow out. So as I said, we want to backfill with native soil, and sometimes that can be a little chunky or make blocks basically, and so you want to break those up with your hands so that it's a finer texture to get down in between the roots. And we don't want to push too much because we don't want to break those fragile roots as we're pushing that soil down on top of them. So you want to make sure to create kind of a well around the tree so that it creates a reservoir for that water to percolate down over those roots. And then of course, to help preserve that moisture in the soil, we're going to add some mulch around that new tree. And then of course we always want to make sure that we label any new plant that we put in here. You can see we've got quite a tree ring around this established, and we're going to put more mulch in here. But if you're putting this out in your lawn, you want to make sure that you have a significant tree ring to protect it from a weed eater or any lawnmower or anything like that. Now the last thing that we're going to do, and you want to make sure to read your care instructions that come along with your tree, because there might be some pruning that you need to do. In our particular situation here, this tree has not been topped or anything, and so we do need to prune it. Now, I know this looks drastic, but we actually are going to want to cut this back to about 18 to 24 inches. And that's because as a fruit tree, you want that branch scaffolding to be much lower. It'll make maintenance and harvesting of your fruit much easier later on as those branches continue to grow. Otherwise, they might be up a little bit too high out of your reach. So here, we're going to measure about 18 inches, which is just right about here. So we are going to actually cut off all of this. We're going to find a bud, and there's a bud right there. So we're going to cut right above that bud. So now I know we've just taken off half of this tree and you feel like you've paid for half of this, but this is really the best situation for this tree, and it's important. Some trees will already come with their top cut, so it might be shipped to you like this. And what's going to happen is all of these small buds are going to push out and come out this spring, and so you'll have your branching starting at this height here. This will make for a great tree as it continues to grow. We will check back on it as we prune it even more because it tends to need a series of pruning each year. While it might look drastic, this is tough love on a fruit tree, and I promise it'll make for a great orchard in years to come. We've been talking a lot about the importance of watering trees, especially in the wintertime when we haven't had much rainfall. Well, I want to show you a little bit of a tool that might be helpful for you. You might remember we just recently planted a nectarine tree, and what we have here is called a tree gator. Now, this is a woven plastic that we will lay around the base of this tree here. And this one's the low profile tree gator, and it's suitable for putting underneath low branching evergreens or other shrubs. But in this situation, we're going to use it around our nectarine because the stem's not very strong yet. What you'll do is you'll fill this up with a hose, and it contains about 15 gallons worth of water. So By watering with this, you'll know exactly how much water you're putting on your tree. When we're out hand watering, a lot of times we think we might have been standing there for quite a while, when in reality we haven't been standing out there for that long. Or when we're watering, the water's actually running off rather than going down into that tree root ball that needs that water. This allows us to fill it up, gives it 15 gallons of water, and we know that it's slowly going to percolate down into that root ball. You can see here on the back side that it has these little valves that allows that water to percolate down into that root zone. Now, this is one style. There is another style that is more of a tent-like style that leans on the trunk of the tree, and that's more appropriate for larger trees. It also contains 15 gallons of water when you fill it up. And you would want to fill these up about once or twice a week, depending on the time of the year. Now, this is great for this time of year when we're not getting a lot of rainfall, but I would suggest that come spring you remove these, because while they are porous when they're filled up with water, when we have heavy rainfalls, they tend to act like a raincoat and they prevent that water from getting down into the ground below it. So even though we might have gotten rain, you might think your tree's gotten moisture, it might not have. So take these off when the spring rains start coming and then put them back on in the summertime. One of the nice things about the tent gator bag is that if you have a very large tree, you can actually zip multiple bags together in order to provide it with more water. Depending on how often you fill these up, after they drain out, a lot of times they'll just be laying there, which serve as a nice visual reminder for you to water your trees. I often suggest to people who are thinking about landscaping their yard to consider what it looks like in the wintertime. A lot of times we don't give much consideration to our garden in late winter, early spring, but this is the time that we're so eager to get outside and see some sort of life and to be reassured that spring is returning. Hellebores is a perfect plant for this situation. You can see here we have a couple, and they tend to get covered over with a lot of leaf debris about this time. And so now's when we come in here, we're going to clean up some of this old vegetation. They're a hardy perennial from zones 4 to 9, which means here in Oklahoma they will come back every year. Now you can see that they tend to have leathery leaves, and so they're almost semi-evergreen. Depending on how cold our winters got, these leaves will start to look a little more tattered. This is what we're going to remove right now just to make room for some of this newer growth underneath here. Just going to clean out some of these old leaves and also some of this deciduous leaves that have fallen on top of it. You can see there's plenty of new growth coming on underneath here, as well as flowers. They're a great plant because they come in a range of flower colors, from maroons to creams to even a green color and some speckled flowers as well. Hellebores are often called Christmas rose or Lenten rose because that kind of covers the span in which they flower from Christmas to Easter. So as this plant progresses throughout this season, these leaves will get bigger and glossier, and the flowers, they'll last for about a month, but eventually they'll turn into a green seed pod. As those pods mature, they will pop open and release those seeds, and so a lot of times you'll see some baby seedlings coming up underneath the protection of the parent plant. Now, hellebores do cross-pollinate, so if you have other colored varieties in your garden, you likely won't receive the same color off of that seedling as the parent plant, so it'll be a surprise. You can transplant those seedlings, and it'll take anywhere from 2 to 4 years before they bloom for you. Now, another little trick is a lot of times our weather kind of varies, and so it might be too cold to get out and enjoy these flowers, and if it is, or you know you're going to have a heavy rainstorm coming through, go ahead and trim the flowers off about 1 inch down the stem, and then just get a nice container of water, a glass jar of water, and float those in there. It's a great way to display your flowers and all the ranges of colors that they come in. Now, in an arrangement like this, these flowers will last for about a week or two, but it's a nice way to preserve them before the storm gets them. Hellebores, they like dappled shade, and so you can see we have them planted here underneath some deciduous trees, which is nice because it allows the sunlight to come through in late winter to get to these plants, but shelters them from the extreme heat in the summertime. They also like the woodland garden because it tends to have rich, moist soil. Now, once they are established, they are fairly drought tolerant, so don't be too concerned if you have a more mature plant and we've had a dry winter. Because they do like rich soil, they do benefit from a side dressing of fertilizer later on in spring, so we'll kind of come back and work that into the soil. Hellebores are a great plant and a great reminder that spring is returning, and something to consider for that winter landscape. While it might not be St. Patrick's Day yet, as you prepare to get into the Irish spirit, it's time to start thinking about planting potatoes in your garden. Late February to mid-March is a great time to plant potatoes, and you might start seeing what are called seed potatoes showing up in your local nurseries and feed stores. And potatoes, we don't typically start out with a true seed. We start out with something known as a seed potato. And here we've purchased a bag of them. Sometimes they're sold individually in a crate. And they come in different sizes. You can see here, this particular one is Kennebec. And they've already started to sprout there. Now, if you have some, this is a Yukon Gold here, and you can see the size variation of these seed potatoes as they come in. And if you have a large one like this, you might want to think about cutting it up. And it also helps to stretch your dollars a little bit more. Something that's about this size, you could plant it as is and get one plant. But this one, we can get multiple plants out of it. Now, in order to cut these up, you want to think about where the eyes are, and these little growths right here, all these little indentions are going to be what are called your eyes. And these will all sprout to make new plants. So as we cut this up, you want to think about cutting it into chunks. You don't want to make slivers or anything like that. You also don't want to just cut the eyes off and not leave some of the fleshy tuber underneath it, because this tuber is actually a lot of carbohydrates that help supply energy into these sprouts to grow. So if you cut these too thin, then you're not going to have that energy for these sprouts to grow. So we're just really going to look at maybe quartering this into large chunks. You can see here we've got a good eye there. We've got another one there. On this one we've got a couple here. And then we're going to cut this one as well. And these pieces all have eyes as well in there. So these are great quarters. You want to cut them into about a 1.5 ounce to 3 ounce piece. So now we can have 4 potatoes out of that one seed potato. Now after you've cut these, they are wet on the inside, so you want to cure these a little bit. And by curing them, what it means is to let them dry out. So this actually is a nice drying rack in order to do that. And you can see here we have some that we cut a couple of days ago, and they've already started to cure over. And so now they're not wet. And this helps prevent bacteria from getting into this seed potato and causing it to rot before it even has a chance to grow. It just kind of creates a leathery covering, it calluses over, and so it's more protected in the soil against that bacteria. Now that does take a couple of days preparation, and if you don't have time for that, another option to do is to go ahead and take these cuttings that you have, get some powdered sulfur or some granular sulfur, and you're going to shake that sulfur around onto those potatoes. And when you pull them out, depending on whether you're using a powder or a granular, it'll stick to the wet side of that potato. And basically sulfur is a little bit acidic, and so it's going to kind of reduce the pH around that exposed area, and it'll help protect it a little bit better from any bacteria that it comes in contact with the soil. And so these you can go ahead and plant in the ground directly. So that's just a little bit of a faster option. Now if you're planting these, again, you want to make sure that there's 1 to 2 eyes on each seed potato. And when you plant them, you want to plant them about 1 foot apart and about 4 to 6 inches deep. We're going to plant ours in a potato tower. You might have heard about this, and so we're going to build one and we'll show you how to do that. This is the potato tower that we'll be planting our seed potatoes in. And the idea behind this is that it will be a little bit easier to harvest the potatoes, because instead of digging, you're just going to unclip the wire and simply knock the soil off of the potatoes. The other thing is it's supposedly a nice space saver. So again, we'll be able to grow several potato plants in this 2 by 2 foot space instead of a large planting bed. Now, in order to make a potato tower, we've used some rabbit mesh because we have a lot of critters around here and they might try to get in there and get our potatoes and harvest them a little sooner than what we want. So we used a finer mesh. Now you can use chicken wire or any sort of livestock hog wire or anything. It doesn't really matter too much on the size of the mesh. This is about a 5 foot piece, and we've just folded it over on itself and we've secured it with zip ties. You can buy metal loops to kind of tie it together, but we've actually found that the zip ties work better because, again, when we harvest it, we'll just be able to cut those zip ties. Now, after you have a cylinder built, you're going to want to stabilize it to the ground somehow, and we've used rebar here and just zip tied it to the outside, and we'll put another one in on this side. Now, depending on your soil, it might depend on which type of rebar you want to use. There's a couple of types. You, of course, have your regular rebar, and then you have this that has a winged piece on it. And this might be better if you have a looser soil or something. So depending on what your soil is and also what materials you might just have available to you. Now, we're going to build 2 of these. We have one built, and the reason why we're building 2 is because we have several seed potatoes to plant, but also we're going to try 2 different methods. One is to put newspaper down at the bottom and put a couple of inches of soil at the base of it, and we're going to then line the outside of the cage with some straw. We've actually brought some straw here that's called chopped straw, and so this will make it a little bit easier versus some of the long straw that you would buy in a regular bell. As we do this, we'll layer our seed potatoes and we'll continue to pile more soil on top of it and layer more seed potatoes. The idea is that each one of those layers of seed potatoes will grow out of the side, so the plants will be able to get photosynthesis from the sunlight on the side. And as we continue to pile more soil, we'll have several planting beds of potatoes. Now for our other method, we're going to put 1 layer of seed potatoes at the bottom, cover that up with 4 inches of soil, and we'll let that set and grow for a while before we come back and hill them once again. So on our traditional method, we'll only have 1 layer of potatoes, but on our potato tower, we'll have several layers of seed potatoes. We've finished our multi-layer tower, and now we've just finished our single layer. You can see there's 1 layer of soil there, and we've put the straw as kind of a barrier around the basket to hold that soil in. So really, the potatoes are buried in soil completely, more so than just straw. Now we're going to finish the top with straw to help insulate it and preserve any moisture, and then we'll just water it in. And we'll find out soon which one grows more potatoes.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. Oklahoma Gardening will not air on the main OETA channel for the next 3 weeks, but you can catch some repeats of our favorite episodes on the OETA Okla channel. We encourage you to consider supporting OETA during festival and be right back here starting March 25th for more TV you'll grow to love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, TLC Garden Centers, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society. We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.